G'day, it's Allan Udy from the Historical Aviation Film Unit here. We're going to try something a little bit different today. I'm with Tony Haycock, in a past life editor of Classic Driver magazine here in New Zealand. You've also done a lot of driving around New Zealand, around Europe, haven't you, Tony?
New Zealand, Europe, Australia, yeah. Cover a fair few miles and still do.
You've done the work. So, driving around New Zealand the last few days, there have been a few things that have crossed my mind. One of the things is there are numerous signs around rural speeds are going to be decreasing soon and so on. There's also a bit in the news about speed from Blenheim to Nelson being reduced to almost 80k for the entire way. All of this is obviously done from the point of view of road safety, reducing our national road toll on an annual basis. As an experienced driver, what's your opinion on all of this?
It's a complete load of bullshit. It's not addressing the problem.
Right.
And there quite clearly is a problem, but the problem isn't the speed. The problem, despite what we listen to, isn't the state of the roads. The problem, despite what we heard, isn't the age of the cars in New Zealand whatsoever. It's quite purely, as they say, the nut behind the wheel. The driving standards in New Zealand, and I'm sure you'd have noticed it in the last few days on your little trip around.
Absolutely.
The roads are populated by bloody idiots. And despite what they try and tell you, they're not tourist and rental cars, because I take a fairly close lot of attention to who's trying to kill me. And unless tourist and rental cars drive dirty white Toyota Utes or tired old Japanese import cars, it's not the tourists. And I think what's happened is that's an easy thing for they, being those in power, to focus on, just really, I guess, to divert attention from the fact that no one here can bloody drive.
Right, and so we're also seeing in New Zealand at the moment a huge increase in roadside barriers. Now there's a lot of argument as, do we have roadside barriers? Do we have a single median strip barrier? What's your feeling on the whole barrier situation? Because I've been noticing a lot of barriers on dead straight roads, and I'm thinking, what's the point? There's a lot of cost there.
And I don't really think it saves anything. And if I'm driving to my friend's place in Germany, they're about 30 minutes from Frankfurt Airport. So I've got about 10 minutes on an autobahn, which normally is unrestricted, so I can leave there in my rental car and blast it up to 250k if I want to, if the traffic will allow it. And that's an interesting thing, is that whilst there is no speed limit in a lot of those roads there, people drive at different speeds. Trucks are governed to 90 kilometres an hour. Cars will sit in the next lane at about 130. There seems to be this strange blinkered way of thinking in New Zealand. Everybody must sit on the speed limit. And if you're going 1k over, you're going to die. And if you're going to go 1k under, you're going to die. Which is, of course, absolute bollocks once again, because it depends entirely on where you're driving, what the weather's like, what the road's like, what the vehicle is in that you're driving. And the New Zealand way seems to be that you're taught that whilst you're hearing speed limit, what actually seems to be the way of thinking is that's the speed you must drive at. And if it's a 100k road, I shall drive down at 100k, even though there's an S-bend coming up there that I can't quite see around, and I really ought to slow down a bit.
People are taking that 100 as a target that they need to meet, even if it's wet or
absolutely, yeah. And driving out to Dieter and Claudia's place, once I'm off the autobahn, I'm on a 100 kilometre an hour road. It's not a heck of a lot wider than the driveway here southwards. It's 1.5 cars wide, it's tar sealed, it's got trees on both sides, it's got lots of blind corners. There's not a barrier to be seen. It's a 100k piece of road. No one has ever had an accident on it, because you drive according to the conditions. If you can't see what's around the corner, or it's a bit damp, you slow down. It's really not a difficult thing at all.
So yeah, you're driving to the vehicle and to the conditions.
Exactly.
Now, I mean, I'm thinking back late 80s here, driving between central Otago and Dunedin, hitting what was the speed limit at the time of 80 kilometres an hour. So whether it was late 80s or early 90s, that speed limit was put up to 100k, the open road speed limit. So now in a lot of those roads, we're looking at it being reduced again to 80, and yet in the intervening 2.5, 3 decades, safety features in cars have gone through the roof.
Cars have become amazingly safe compared with those times. Absolutely. There's simply no there's no justifiable reason for it. I mean, yes, if you have an accident at 80k, it's going to hurt less than 100k. But if you hit that tree at 80k, you're still no less dead than if you hit it at 100. And if you weren't such a nimrod, you should have been doing about 60 at the time anyway. You don't need the speed limit to be 60 not to hit the tree, but you need to know to drive a car that I need to slow down and go around that corner. And if I do it at 100 or 80, there's a tree there with my name on it. It's actually part of driving. Driving is not just sitting in front of the car and working the steering wheel. And in other parts of the world where learning to drive and getting a driver's license is a far more involved and far more costly process than what it is here, we seem to have lost that. And there's really, I think, that attitude here that a driver's license almost is a right, and as long as you actually know how to start it, make it move forward and go around a corner, you're qualified to drive any sort of car on any sort of road in any sort of conditions. And it doesn't work. I mean, once again, we'll go back to Europe because that's what I know. If you're learning to drive in Germany, your tuition, and you have to be taught to drive by a driving school, includes driving on an unlimited autobahn. It includes driving in a town. It includes driving in the country, because the skills,
you're going to meet all of those.
Because the skills are different for each one.
Yeah.
And I think what happens in New Zealand is you'll get someone who lives in a city and has learnt to drive in city traffic and has learnt to drive on a motorway, but gets to a country road and they're not actually equipped to handle those conditions. There's no idea that just because the speed limit is 100 kilometres an hour or even 80 kilometres an hour, the fact of the matter is if you just want to sit on that, you are going to have an accident.
Yeah. So what it really does boil down to, in your opinion, with your experience, is that, education and training is the real key to bringing the toll down.
Absolutely it is, because despite what you'll hear from so-called experts on the TV, on the radio, our roads are no worse than anywhere else in the world. Yes, European motorways are really good, but they're only a little portion of the roading network, and if you're driving on not a motorway in Italy, they're goat tracks, but guess what? It's still got 100k or sometimes 120k limit, but people don't go flying off the road. And the Italians aren't noted for their following of speed limits anyway, but they still actually know how to drive. Whilst keeping in a lane or following a speed limit is something completely lost on all of them, you also don't see them leaping off the road. And you notice that right through Europe. I did 23,000 kilometres in Europe last year in 12 countries. And only once in that time did I see something that I thought that really wasn't all that clever by another motorist. I was back here a week and on 3 separate occasions some moron tried to kill me.
Yeah, I mean, just as an interesting little anecdote, driving from Taupo to Napier a couple of days ago, I ended up getting stuck behind a line of traffic. I think it was a Mercedes BMW SUV of some description, a fairly large black vehicle, huge yellow L plate on the back. When it eventually turned off, I have to say the road rage was starting to build, and I thought about following them briefly just to have a word, and I didn't want to have a word with the driver because I assumed that it was the driver that was learning. But I wanted to have a word with whoever was in the left-hand seat, the passenger seat in the case of our roads, to say, if you're teaching this person to drive, teach them the consideration for other drivers to pull over when they can, because you pass so many places where you could have pulled over and let this traffic go. I do tend to agree with you. Education is where it's at, and it seems to me that in this country at the moment we are spending a huge amount of money on safety efforts, which are in fact going to be completely worthless because they're not necessary.
Absolutely. No, it's simple things like, as you say, got traffic behind me, I'm not comfortable driving as fast as the car behind me, I have no problem with that. You just move over and let them go. I drive vintage cars, so I'm often the slower car on the road. But if I've got any more than one car behind me, as soon as I've got the opportunity, I'm pulling over and letting them go, because they want to get to where they're going. They can drive as fast as they want. I'm doing my speed, and as long as everyone works like that, traffic flows. And you go overseas to Australia, to Europe, wherever, and the traffic flows simply because slow traffic stays in its lane. They let people go, and it works. Drive down a German autobahn, you've got trucks governed at 90 kilometres. Another 2 lanes out, you've got cars sitting on their governors at 250 kilometres an hour. Heaven forbid if you should be sitting in the outside lane and you don't get out of the way. And there's a very simple way that you know if someone wants coming past. You're always watching your mirrors anyway, but if I'm driving a faster car over there and I'm coming along and I can see someone in the lane up in front of me, 2 flashes of the headlights. It's not any sort of symbol that I'm a moron or that they're a moron. It's just to say I'm coming through.
You're here. Yeah,
and
yeah.
as soon as they see that, they move over. And the same goes even with changing lanes.
Yeah.
Traffic over there is so much heavier than what it is here. We have no idea what traffic is like. And you've driven in that part of the world, Alan.
Absolutely.
You know very well that if you're driving down the road and you want to change lanes, you flick your indicator on. A gap appears.
Yeah.
It's not some sort of challenge to the other driver's manhood to let you in.
Exactly.
It's quite simple. I'm coming in. And also, I'm sure you've noticed as well, flicking the indicator on doesn't mean I would like to change lanes. It actually means I am changing lanes.
Yes.
And so you'd better leave the gap because I'm coming that way anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
But it works. Everybody knows. Yeah. You don't sit in the outside lane going slower than the ones on the inside. In a lot of countries, to pass on the inside on a multi-lane road's illegal.
Yeah.
And it should be here. But could you imagine the Wellington motorway, the Kapiti Expressway here, or the Auckland motorway working like that? Because you get so many people sitting on the outside lane under the speed limit, and the only way for traffic to flow is to go up the inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, great talk, Tony. I think we've got a crowd of people coming in here shortly, so we might have to go. But I guess the takeaway messages from this are, parents, teach your children some consideration when you're teaching them to drive. Give them plenty of experience in different road conditions, vehicles and road types, and make sure that they are trained up well. And I guess New Zealand Transport Authority and New Zealand Government, stop building these fences down the side of the road where they're not necessary, and start putting some more money into education.
Spend the money where it's actually going to do some good for the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's try not to have an accident.
All right, cheers guys. See you next time.
It was fun. It was, wasn't it? We should do more of that.
I think so.